Hello all, welcome to this session. In this session, I am going to answer one of the Java interview questions. That is, explain about final keyword in Java. Let me answer. Final is a non-access modifier. In Java, we have different modifiers, and these modifiers at a high level are categorized into two types. One is access modifiers, other one is non-access modifiers. And coming to the access modifiers, we have different access modifiers like public, private, okay, then default, and then protected, okay. And coming to the non-access modifier, we have static, final. Static is one thing, and then we have final, and then we have abstract. These are the non-access modifiers. As you can clearly see, final is one of the modifiers which falls into this non-access modifiers category. So final is a non-access modifier. So this final non-access modifier or keyword, when mentioned before a variable, then the value of the variable cannot be updated. The value will be the final value. Okay. So the variable almost becomes a constant. Okay, it's a constant, right? The value of the variable will not change anymore. When you specify a particular variable with final non-access modifier, the value that you will assign for the first time to this variable cannot be updated anymore. Okay, and also the moment you mention final modifier before a variable, it is mandatory for us to initialize the variable. Okay, if you don't initialize the variable with a particular value, that is initial value, you are going to get the compiler error. Once you initialize this final variable with a initial value, then you cannot update it anymore. Okay, you cannot update the value of the variable anymore because the final means constant. Okay, the final variable is nothing but a constant in Java. The value of the variable cannot be updated. It's a final value. And the same final keyword or non-access modifier, when you specify before a method, that particular method cannot be overridden by the child classes. Okay. So if this particular method, which is specified with final, is created in the class, for that class, if you create some child classes, in that child classes, you cannot override that particular final specified method from the parent class. Okay. So that's the next thing. And the same final keyword or non-access modifier, when specified before a class, that particular class cannot be inherited by any other class, or that particular final class cannot be a parent of any other classes. So we cannot create any child classes for the final specified classes. Okay. So hope guys you got some clarity. Let me now practically demonstrate all these things for you, like what will happen when you specify final before a variable, what will happen when you specify final before a method, what will happen when you specify this final non-access modifier before a class. For that, I'll switch to this Eclipse IDE, and here I'll create a new class. Okay, I'll just name this class as uh, sample F. Okay, something sample F, random name I'm giving. Click on finish, and now in this I'll create some variables and methods. I'll just declare some variable like int a, okay, int b, like this. Now I'll create some methods. Public void sample one. This one method. Then we have public void sample two, another method. I'll create like two methods. Let's say system.out.println inside sample one method. Here also I'll create print statement saying inside sample two method. Okay, like this I created two methods. Fine. Now what will happen if I specify final non-access modifier before a variable? Okay. For example, here two variables are there. I'll pick the first variable and will specify the final non-access modifier before a variable. The moment I provide this final non-access modifier or specify this final non-access modifier before a variable, I'm going to get an error saying the blank field may not have been initialized. Okay, you see, I told you already, right? When you specify final before a variable, the Java compiler error will come asking you to initialize the variable. That means we have to assign the value to the variable for the first time. Initializing means the same thing, right? So assigning some value to the variable for the first time that I have to do to overcome this error. So I'll just assign some value like 10. So now, if you see the other variable where final non-access modifier is not specified, there is not a mandatory that you have to initialize this variable or assign some first value to this variable. Okay, but for the final specified variable, it's mandatory. Okay, to initialize that particular variable or to initialize or to assign some initial value to the variable. Okay, otherwise the Java compiler error will come. And at the same time, this variable value cannot be updated. Whatever the value that you assign to this particular variable for the first time to this final specified variable, that value, the 10 value cannot update here. For example, if you try to do so, a is equal to 20. Like that, if you try to do so, immediately I'm going to get an error. Final field a cannot be assigned. You cannot modify the value of this variable. Okay, variable a is initialized or assigned with the first value that is 10. That first value or initialized value cannot be updated. Okay, that's what is final. Indirectly or directly, okay, this variable is nothing but a constant. It's not a variable anymore. It's a constant which will hold the same value throughout the program. No matter anywhere in the program, you can update this value because this is a final value or constant value. Okay, in Java, the constant value or constant can be created by specifying the final non-access modifier before a variable. Okay, how to create a constant in Java? A kind of variable. We cannot call that as a variable, guys. Okay, variable means its value keeps changing. Variable. Okay, as the name speaks, variable. It keeps varying. But the moment you specify a final non-access modifier before a variable, the value, this particular thing is a constant. Okay, this a is not a variable. This is a constant now. Okay, whose value is constant. It's not going to vary. Okay, so that's what is final all about. Now, if I specify the same final non-access modifier before a method, what happens? You will not see any difference here. But this particular method, which is specified with this final non-access modifier, cannot be overridden by their child classes. For example, sample f is a class. For this class, I'll create a child class. So I'll just name this as class C. Just a random name I'm giving. And I'll just drag this so that you can see both the classes. This sample f class where we have this final modifier mentioned method. If I try to, first I will make this class C a child class of the sample f. For that, I'll use extends keyword, extends sample f. Okay, and simply say extend sample f. The moment I do that, the class C will become the child class of the sample f. Now, if I try to override this method in the child class, for example, public void sample1, like this, if I try to override, okay, create a duplicate method in the child class of this parent class having this, but the particular method is a final specified non-access modifier method. That kind of methods cannot be overridden. You see, you are already getting an error saying cannot override the final method from sample f. Okay, from this parent class, you cannot override this particular method because this particular method in the parent class is specified in final non-access modifier. So you cannot override it here. Okay, if you try to duplicate this in the child classes, you are going to get this kind of error. So it's not possible. You have to remove that. What about this method, which is not specified with final non-access modifier, which is not there? In that case, you can override it. Not a problem. Public void sample2. If I try to override, you see, I'll not get any error. You see, am I getting any error? No. Why? Because this one is final modified specified method, so you cannot override that. But this method is not specified with any final non-access modifier, so you can override it in the child classes without any problem. You are not getting any error. That's the reason. Fine. So that's also good. Now you understood, right? The same final non-access modifier, you can also specify before a class. What happens? You see, before I specify this final modifier or non-access modifier before this class, I'm able to create the child classes for this particular sample f class, right? Sample f class is now the parent of the class C. I'm not getting any compiler error anywhere. The moment I provide final non-access modifier or specify this final non-access modifier before a class and just click on the save button, you see immediately I'm going to get an error saying that the type class C cannot subclass the final class sample F. So since this class is final, it cannot have any children or it cannot become parent of any child classes. Okay, you cannot create child classes for the final non-access modifier specified classes. Okay, you are going to get this kind of error. So I have to remove the final from here, otherwise this error will not go off, or I just need to comment this out, otherwise the error will be there like that. Okay, fine. So hope guys you got an idea about this final keyword in Java. Explain about final keyword in Java. You have to start by saying final is a non-access modifier in Java, and when specified before variable, that variable will not be a variable anymore. It will become a constant. The value that is assigned to that kind of variable constant is a constant, not change anymore. You cannot update it. And next thing is that when you specify the final non-access modifier before a method, that method cannot be overridden in the child classes. And next thing is final when you specify before a class, that class cannot be inherited by any other classes, or this class which is specified with final non-access modifier cannot become a parent of any other classes in Java. So with practical demonstration, I've answered this question for you. So that's all for this session. Thank you. Bye-bye.